Hello, Lindenwood class. So here is the tall tale that I meant to tell yesterday, but that we ran out of time for. This tall tale comes to us from Missouri, which is in the middle of the country. And it is a tale called Old Sally Cato. Now, one morning in autumn, old Sally Cato, a widow woman, rose with the chickens in her cabin far back in the Missouri hill country. She set out biscuits and gravy and hot coffee, then rousted her two sons, Big Tom and Lil Jack, and she rousted them out of bed by lifting the bedsteads and spilling the two onto the floor. "Time for you to go and fetch one of the cattle," she said. "You bring it on back, kill it, skin it, and get the beef ready so's I can cure it. I want to be sure we have plenty of meat for the winter." Well, little Jack, who had a small voice, whined, "Couldn't we wait till next week or so? That's a lot of work." "It'll be the same amount of work next week or next month," said his ma, "but winter won't hold back, even if you do. Now go." Then she said, "And be careful you don't do anything to rouse Billy Bally Bully." Well, at the name of the giant who lived behind the hill, both Lil Jack and Big Tom began to shake. They knew that the horrible monster, as big as a mountain, or bigger, was an old greedy gut who'd as soon swallow a man as look at him. "Maybe we should wait a minute afore fetching that beef," said Tom. "Git," said their mother, and they got. Sally dragged her old spinning wheel out onto the porch, shaded by bittersweet vines. Watching her two sons going off dragfoot toward the pasture where the cattle were kept, she sighed and shook her head. "I swear, if their brains was in birds' heads, all the birds of the air would fly backwards." Then she set to her spinning. Squeakety whir 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 went the old spinning wheel. Squeakety whir whir whir. Meanwhile, Jack and Tom trudged toward the high pasture. Along the way they were startled by a sudden fluttering of crows from a nearby meadow. The birds shot up to the sky like a cloud of black smoke. "Well," said little Jack, "them crows mean bad luck." "Oh," said Big Tom, "you listen to Ma too much. A crow don't mean nothing more'n a crow." But when they got to the pasture where the beef cattle should have been grazing, they found it empty. The little herd had wandered even farther back among the hills. "Now what?" grumbled Tom in his booming voice. But Jack dropped to his knees and searched among the grasses and fallen leaves until he found a Granddaddy Longlegs. Holding the insect gently in his palm, he asked, "Granddaddy Longlegs, where are the cows? Granddaddy Longlegs, where are the cows?" As he watched closely, the insect lifted one slender leg and pointed to the west. "That way," said Jack confidently, letting the spider go back to its leaf pile. "I swear you and Ma are two of a kind," said Tom, but he followed his brother higher into the hills where the butternuts and hickory and elm grew thickest. The higher they climbed, the more they kept their eyes and ears peeled for any sign of Billy Bally Bully. They were dangerously close to the giant's territory, and they knew that anyone the monster caught trespassing would be gobbled up faster than a duck swallows a June bug. At last they found the missing cattle in a tiny meadow that neither of them had seen before. Straightway Big Tom selected the fattest animal and knocked it over the head with his hammer. "Why'd you do that?" asked Jack. "So's we can do our work here without Ma watching and saying as we're doing it wrong and making us take twice the time to get it done," answered Tom. "Now, help me hang this carcass from the tree so's we can skin it and dress it." "But Ma said—" Jack began. "You just pipe down and start skinning," his brother said. They worked for a little while. Then Jack stopped suddenly and said, "I hear something." "No, you don't," said his brother. "Keep working." Jack worked a bit longer and then said, "I hear something, only it's nearer." "No, you don't." Tom didn't look up from his work. "Keep working." Suddenly they both stopped, because this time both of them had heard a boom, boom, like thunder over the hill. A minute later, they saw Billy Bally Bully tromping over the hill with no more effort than a widow climbing a stile to cross a fence. To the frightened brothers, the giant looked bigger than the mountain itself. His black hair stood up like a grove of trees. His eyes were as big around as wagon wheels, and his mouth, filled with yellow teeth the size of tombstones, looked wide enough to swallow half the county. The giant sniffed the air with nostrils big and black and deep as pits. The frightened boys hugged each other and shook, too scared to move. "I smell fresh meat. What you doing?" asked the giant. "Skinning beef," said Tom, his voice suddenly as small as Jack's. "Give me some." Quick as a wink, Tom cut a big chunk of meat and tossed it to the giant, who gulped it down whole. The giant licked his lips. "Give me more," he demanded. Tom sliced off an even bigger slab and threw it into the monster's outstretched palm. The giant swallowed it right down. "More!" he roared. Soon Jack and Tom were cutting up the beef carcass as fast as they could and flinging it at Billy Bally Bully. But every helping only made the giant hungrier. "More!" he thundered. "More, more, more!" "There ain't no more," said Jack, whose voice had shrunk to a whisper. "Then I'll eat you," rumbled the giant, stretching out a hand as big as a barn. But before he could grab the brothers, they took off running like 60 for home. Behind them they heard the boom, boom, boom of the giant following them. On every side the trees danced up and down with each deafening boom. Fear put wings on the brothers' feet. In next to no time they had reached the little cabin where their mother sat working her spinning wheel. Squeakety whir, whir, whir. "Ma! Ma!" they screeched. "Billy Bally Bully's after us!" "What did you do to rile him up?" asked old Sally suspiciously. Now she could hear the boom, boom of the onrushing giant. "Nothing," said Jack. "We was just skinning the beef." "You did your skinning back in the hills?" she exclaimed. "Ain't I told you time and again that there's nothing like the smell of fresh meat to bring Billy Bally Bully sniffing around?" Boom! "He's gonna eat us, Ma," wailed Tom. Boom, boom! "And I'm half a mind to let him," she said. "You two are as sorry as a pair of worn-out shoes." Now the shingles of the cabin roof and the ground shook from the boom, boom, boom of the giant's tread. The woman's hound dog, Blue, howled from under the porch. A second later, the animal was off and running. "Hide us, Ma!" Tom and Jack yelled. They were so frightened their teeth were rattling as loud as hogs eating charcoal. Sally pointed to the big old kettle in the yard that she used for making soap. "Up in that pot and hide yourselves under it. I'll see to old Greedy Guts myself." Just before Billy Bally Bully lumbered into view, old Sally Cato had returned to her spinning. Under her apron she had tucked a feather duster, a pair of knitting needles, and a carving knife. Looking up at the gangling, hairy-faced creature glaring down at her, Sally had to keep a tight hold on her courage, as well as her feet, which wanted to hightail it across hedgerows and cornfields as fast as her hound dog had. "Where'd them fellows go?" the giant asked. He sniffed the air. "They's around. I smell 'em." The old woman pretended to pay him no mind. Her spinning wheel went squeakety whir, 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 in a voice so loud that it rattled the roof over her head. Billy Bally Bully demanded, "Whar're they hiding?" Still the old woman gave all her attention to the spinning wheel. Squeakety whir, whir, whir. "You can't hear me, old woman?" The giant got down on his hands and knees and pushed his bristly face close to the woman's. He opened his mouth wide to shout in her ear. At that instant, old Sally ran into his mouth all the way to the back. Then she shook that feathered duster about, releasing great clouds of dust that made the giant wheeze and sneeze, and the old woman hung on to his tonsils for the worst of this, and then she slid down his gullet on into his stomach. There she ran around, jabbing at his insides with her knitting needles, giving Billy Bally Bully the granddaddy of all gut aches. The pain was so fearful that the monster bellowed and stamped and ran around in circles, knocking down one corner of the porch and smashing the wheelbarrow flat. Tom and Jack peeped out from under the soap kettle and saw Billy Bally Bully frantically waving his arms like a windmill gone to the bad and sounding like a dying calf in a hailstorm. The whole countryside shook as if hit by an earthquake. Inside the giant, the old woman found his heart. Then she took her carving knife and finished him off lickety-split. But even though dead, Billy Bally Bully was too dumb to fall over. For a long time he just stood, glassy-eyed, while the brothers, under the soap kettle, tried to guess what had happened. Suddenly the giant pitched over backward like a felled tree. The force of him hitting the ground raised the cabin and barn and outhouse 10 feet in the air before they dropped back into place. Matter-of-factly, the old woman cut herself free of the giant. Then she called to her 2 sons and showed them the beef lying unharmed inside the giant, who had swallowed each chunk whole. None of it was a bit harmed. "Now then," said the woman, "carry that beef out to the smokehouse. It'll be dusk dark soon. And next time, when I tell you to do something, or not to do something, you listen good." "Yes, ma'am," Big Tom and Little Jack answered. "Good," said old Sally. "Now you get on with your business, and let me get on about mine. I swear, these days it ain't nothing but one interruption after the other," she said. In no time, though, she was happily humming to herself while her spinning wheel went squeakety whir, whir, whir. And that's the end of our story.